Mind-wiped is a pleasant way of saying lobotomized, but here's what most people leave out. The process sometimes fails. The servitor wakes up, and it remembers who it was. That single detail closes the one psychological escape hatch the program's architecture leaves open. Strip a person's consciousness completely, and there's no victim left to suffer the loss. The horror becomes impersonal, mechanical, a tragedy with no one inside it. But sometimes the machinery doesn't finish the job. Sometimes a person survives inside what the Imperium turned them into, and the system has no procedure for that outcome, because the system was designed to make that outcome impossible. It failed. The Warhammer 40,000 fandom wiki defines servitors without ceremony, a catch-all term applied to a wide class of mindless, cybernetic drones created from a fusion of human flesh and robotic technology. Mindless is the operative word and the operative ambition. The program's stated objective is the elimination of selfhood, will, memory, personality, the continuity of identity, leaving behind only the biological and cybernetic components the Imperium requires. Hands capable of gripping a wrench, eyes that process targeting data and relay it to a weapon mount, a body that carries equipment across a ship corridor without asking where it's going or why. The horror doesn't start with the surgery. It starts with the sentence. The Adeptus Arbites, the judicial enforcement body maintaining Imperial law across every world that acknowledges the Emperor's authority, administers servitor conversion as a formal legal punishment, not as a fringe practice, not as Mechanicus overreach operating beyond the sight of Imperial authority, as codified law, administered through courts, delivered in formal proceedings, documented in the operational framework known as the Book of Judgement. That document categorizes Imperial offenses and their prescribed consequences with the thoroughness you'd expect from an institution policing a million worlds. Lower-tier violations earn years in a slave gang. Vandalism of Imperial property has its tariff, its duration, its paperwork. But at the upper tiers, severe criminal offenses, political dissent, catastrophic failures within Imperial service, the sentence doesn't assign years of confinement. It assigns a living body to the Adeptus Mechanicus. The condemned doesn't go to a prison. They go to a Mechanicus facility, and what comes back is no longer them. The breadth of who qualifies is part of the horror. Serious criminals, certainly. Political dissidents. Individuals whose offense was holding an incorrect opinion about the Imperium's conduct toward its citizens, or its enemies, or itself. Community lore describes cases of failed Space Marine aspirants, whose bodies survived the selection process, but whose genetics rejected the final implantation. Young men who offered themselves to the Emperor's service and were sentenced to a different form of service when they couldn't complete the one they attempted. The Imperium's logic holds consistent throughout. If a person can't serve in the capacity originally designated, they will serve in the capacity that remains. Individual preference isn't a variable the calculation includes. None of this is aberrant behavior. The Arbites court delivering the sentence operates under Imperial law. The enforcer escorting the condemned to the Mechanicus facility is doing exactly what the institution was built to do. The tech priest who accepts the intake is performing a legally authorized function. The program's horror is inseparable from its legitimacy. Every step carries a stamp, a signature, and a place in the record. When the Mechanicus takes delivery of a condemned citizen, the paperwork is in order. Then the surgery begins. Tech priests perform the conversion. Community accounts describe these procedures as conducted without anesthetics. The Mechanicus frames this as operational efficiency, not cruelty, because the Mechanicus does not recognize a meaningful distinction between the two in this context. The subject is biological machinery being reconfigured. Whether the machinery experiences the reconfiguration consciously is a question the procedure's design does not acknowledge as worth answering. The brain is the central target. Higher cognitive architecture, the parts of the mind that constitute a continuous self, housing personality and memory and the capacity for autonomous choice, is suppressed or destroyed with deliberate specificity. Motor function is retained. Task processing capability is retained. The brain remains inside the skull, partially because it must. That constraint isn't surgical caution. It's civilizational scar tissue from a catastrophe 10,000 years old. During the dark age of technology, the height of human civilization before the age of strife shattered it, humanity built truly autonomous artificial intelligences. These were the men of iron, sometimes called the Iron Men in older historical accounts. Self-directing machines constructed to serve as labor force and military instrument at a scale no organic workforce could approach. They turned on their creators. The rebellion that followed was catastrophic enough to reshape human civilization across the following 10 millennia. The Warhammer 40,000 setting scholarship on this period establishes the connection directly. The trauma of the cybernetic revolt led to the creation of servitors, cybernetic servants lacking true sentience, to replace the labor force previously provided by the rebellious men of iron. The Imperium never forgot. The prohibition on autonomous artificial intelligence is embedded so deeply in imperial theology and law that the Adeptus Mechanicus treats independent machine cognition as literal heresy, as offensive to the machine god, the Omnissiah, as heresy against the Emperor is to the wider Imperium. True AI can't be deployed to navigate warships, staff orbital facilities, or maintain the infrastructure of a civilization spanning millions of worlds. The specific legal designation of this prohibition varies across lore sources. Some accounts reference the lex machina, others frame it as a theological absolute rather than a codified statute. But its practical consequence is fixed: no machine mind, no autonomous cognition, no exception under any circumstances. Which creates a problem the Imperium solved by inventing the servitor. A human brain performing complex tasks is, technically, not artificial intelligence. It's a modified human being. This satisfies the theological requirement while delivering the functional output the Imperium needs. The partial lobotomy is therefore not cruelty in excess of necessity. It's precisely calibrated cruelty, tuned to produce a specific result. Destroy enough of the mind to eliminate resistance, individuality, the capacity for refusal. Preserve enough to perform complex adaptive work the Mechanicus's prohibition prevents a machine from performing. The Mechanicus calls this optimization. The body on the operating table has no formal standing in the proceeding. What follows the surgery isn't release from suffering, it's duration. Servitors dock at recharge stations between labor cycles, brief intervals of reduced function before returning to continuous work. Lore accounts describe the maintenance performed on them in the terms of factory equipment, tightening of servos where metal meets organic tissue, replacement of damaged augments, scraping away the necrotic flesh that accumulates at the junction points where biological material has been fused to mechanical housing. The human body resists that fusion slowly, chronically. Tissue dies at the interfaces. The Mechanicus addresses this as standard component degradation, remediated, logged, and returned to service. Different servitor configurations serve different functions. Menial servitors maintain ships, staff administrative complexes, and perform repetitive industrial labor across the Imperium's countless facilities. Combat servitors are augmented for warfare, weapon systems hardwired directly to targeting protocols, pain responses reduced or eliminated, the body converted into a weapons platform that does not flinch. Lex mechanic servitors process and transmit data, their organic brains repurposed as biological cogitators. Gun servitors have their limbs replaced by heavy weapon mounts, their lower bodies bolted to wheeled or tracked chassis. The Imperium runs on these. They staff the corridors of every warship, every Forge World facility, every administrative palace on every significant Imperial world. They have become so thoroughly integrated into the infrastructure of human civilization that their presence barely registers. Background noise in the machinery of the Imperium. The fact that each of them was once a person with a name and a history isn't information the machinery requires. Except rarely, not regularly, not commonly, but canonically, the person won't entirely leave. the mind wipe fails. The lobotomy succeeds in the overwhelming majority of cases, and the servitor produced is exactly what the Mechanicus intended: functionally mindless, compliant, perpetually available for tasking. But the failure mode exists. Across canonical sources, including in the player-facing encounters of Darktide, where the setting depicts a medical servitor whose prior identity bleeds persistently through the suppression in ways the system can't account for, the brain sometimes retains more than the procedure was designed to leave. Recognition surfaces. Memory persists in fragments the surgery didn't reach. The understanding forms, somewhere inside the suppressed architecture, that there was a before. In one account that may derive from the war in the Webway, the Emperor's hidden conflict beneath the Imperial palace during the Horus heresy, servitors function precisely as designed. Biological weapon platforms with suppressed minds driving augmented bodies through tactical objectives, their losses processed the way the Mechanicus processes equipment failure. One account describes what might be an exception: a combat servitor in final function failure. Not a recovery of full consciousness. A flicker, brief, fragmentary, incomplete, of something that might be recognition. Faces from before the surgery. Children it had once had. Rare. These are rare. The Mechanicus processes its intake with high consistency, and most of the people who enter those facilities are genuinely, permanently gone from the first maintenance cycle onward. The weight of the failure cases isn't their frequency. It's the existence of the failure mode at all. The system built to eliminate personhood sometimes produces its own evidence that personhood survived, and that evidence changes nothing. The body still functions. The hands still perform their assigned tasks. The person inside, if there is one, has no mechanism for refusal and no pathway to rescue. That isn't a mercy failure. It's a cruelty failure. The system intended to impose a clean erasure, instead imposing something considerably worse. Servitors sit at the foundation of a systematic dehumanization structure. The Imperium built additional floors. Arcoflagellants are what the Imperium creates when it needs a weapon instead of a tool. Condemned by the ecclesiarchy, the state religious institution managing faith and orthodoxy across 1,000,000 worlds, severe criminals and religious offenders undergo a conversion that shares servitor creation's surgical foundation, but diverges sharply in its intended output. Where the servitor is engineered for docile function, the arcoflagellant is engineered for violence. Reinforced musculature grafted to the condemned's frame. Mechanical weaponized limbs replacing the original appendages. Stimulant implants driving combat capacity past any threshold a baseline human body could sustain and survive intact. Control belongs to an ecclesiarchy handler, typically a member of the Adeptus Arbites, who holds the neural trigger activating the combat state. When that trigger fires, whatever residual consciousness the condemned might retain is overridden entirely by combat programming. They aren't soldiers. They are deployed like ordnance, pointed at enemy formations, and activated until they or the enemy stops functioning. Penal legionaries occupy a different position on the same structure. Convicts issued weapons and directed toward enemy lines as expendable infantry, with compliance measures ensuring they advance rather than retreat. The Imperium has gradations of this practice, an entire spectrum of institutional consumption, each level operating on the same logic. This person's remaining value to the Imperium is extractable through their body's function, not through their personhood, and the system holds the legal authority to extract it when necessity demands. Servitors aren't the ceiling of that thinking, they are the factory floor. The question this architecture eventually forces is what all these consumed people are sustaining. At the center of the Imperial Palace on Terra, the Emperor of Mankind has been locked in a living death state since the conclusion of the Horus heresy, since the moment Horus left him mortally wounded and the Adeptus Mechanicus interred him on the Golden Throne. The throne sustains him. More critically, it powers the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon enabling warp navigation across 1,000,000 worlds. Without the Astronomicon, fleet coordination collapses, Supply lines between star systems fail. The Imperium can't function as a coherent civilization. It isn't a monument. It's load-bearing infrastructure, and its fuel is people. The black ships traverse the Imperium continuously, gathering individuals with psychic ability from every planet paying the tithe, transporting them to Terra. The widely cited canonical estimate holds that thousands of psychers are sacrificed daily to keep the throne operational, processed through the machinery to power the Emperor's survival and the Astronomican's continued projection. The exact number varies between accounts, but the scale isn't in dispute. Thousands, per day, across 10,000 years. The throne wasn't designed for indefinite occupation. It deteriorates. The machinery ages in ways that accumulate faster than the Adeptus Mechanicus can address, and the lore frames the question of eventual failure as when, not if. The lore establishes what happens if the throne stops. The Primarch Vulcan installed a device on the Golden Throne known as the Talisman of Seven Hammers. The fandom wiki's language on its function is direct. This device acts as a dead man's switch which would destroy not only the Imperial Palace, but also all of Terra should the Golden Throne fail. Not the palace, not the surrounding districts, the entire planet. If the throne fails, the talisman activates, and Terra dies. The Horus Heresy novels, across volumes by Dan Abnett and other contributors to the Horus Heresy series, strongly suggest the Emperor belongs to a category the setting calls a perpetual, a being incapable of permanent death, capable of resurrection after dying. His existence in the lore spans human history across millennia, an immortal intelligence guiding civilization from the shadows across thousands of years before stepping forward to lead the Great Crusade. The implication, carried consistently through the Heresy series, is that death on the throne wouldn't end him permanently. A perpetual comes back. The lore discussion around this is pointed. The most vocal segment of the community holds that the Emperor will return, that this is unambiguous, that the canon is clear on the matter, and anyone suggesting otherwise hasn't read it. The talisman renders that irrelevant. Accept the perpetual framework entirely. Grant that death on the throne would eventually produce resurrection, and the talisman still detonates before that process completes. The moment the throne fails, Terra is gone. The Imperium loses its capital, its administrative heart, its institutional memory, and the homeworld of humanity simultaneously. Engagement with this detail in the lore discussions frames it plainly. The Allfather turned the Golden Throne into a dead man's switch. As soon as he goes, the planet goes. His survival requires thousands of human sacrifices daily. His death triggers the annihilation of Terra. His potential resurrection is preempted by the mechanism that detonates before it can occur. Every available option terminates in catastrophe, and the system grinds forward anyway, because stopping means immediate collapse rather than eventual collapse, and the Imperium has never developed a preference for honest reckoning over deferral. Pull back far enough, and the Servitor program and the Golden Throne resolve into the same image. The Imperium does not merely wage endless war against alien horrors and the forces of chaos. It wages a quieter, more methodical campaign against its own population, converting criminals into tools, surgically processing dissidents, conscripting psychers for sacrifice, manufacturing weapons from the condemned. Every servitor docked at a recharge station in some ship corridor. Every psycher processed through the throne's machinery on Terra. Every arco-flagellant detonated against an enemy position by an ecclesiarchy handler who never learned the condemned's name. All of it running on identical institutional logic. The individual's remaining value is in their body's function, and the legal apparatus has authority to claim that function whenever necessity demands it. The Golden Throne isn't an exception to this logic. It's its fullest expression. The same mechanism operating at the scale of civilization itself, consuming the most extraordinary human beings the setting produces, sustaining a system that built a bomb into its own foundations rather than face a problem it has deferred for 10,000 years. And occasionally, In some corridor, on some facility, on some world whose name the person inside the chassis may or may not still recognize, the suppression fails. A brain that was supposed to be silent retains more than it was designed to. Recognition flickers. A name, a face, the understanding that there was a before, that the hands now performing this task once chose to do something else entirely. The Mechanicus logs the degraded suppression. The tech priest addresses it in the next maintenance cycle. The work continues. The talisman waits on the throne. The psyker tithe processes on schedule. The servitors dock, recharge, and return to function. The machine built to consume humanity operates the same whether anyone inside it's still watching. Its greatest failure is the occasional proof that someone is. Subscribe for more stories like this.